All right, you guys are on.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Good afternoon,
Jacob.
everyone, or good evening, wherever you might happen to be. It's really a pleasure today to be talking to Sean Doolittle. Let me try it again. I'm drinking tea, honestly. That's all that is. Sean Doolittle in Device-Free Weekend, which I think is a perfectly wonderful title. And I have to ask you, Sean, did you happen to see or have any clue about the glass onion before you wrote this book?
I saw the movie when it came out, but no, I wrote the book I think in 2020,
Right.
so it was a little ways before Glass Onion, but I definitely felt some device-free weekend energy when we went to see Glass Onion.
Well, there was. I already knew the answer because it takes so long for books to get written and get into print. There's no way that he could have foreseen the Glass Onion, but there's some interesting parallels. I also think, I wonder if Elon Musk has just sort of incited writers to write about eccentric tech or overly, whatever, over the top tech billionaires, because there are 5 or 6 books where, those guys are.
They seem to be at the front of our
actors,
national
right?
Conversation, don't they?
They really do. So joining us is Eli Cranor, who I'm delighted to see is going to be our guest host. And I just told him, pardon me while I get my phone open again. I just opened my email to discover that Eli's April 4th book release called Ozark Dogs is an indie next pick. Now, what is that, you will say? And the answer is that the American Bookseller Association has a list that they call for independent booksellers. So there's like 15 or 20 on the list, Eli, is that right?
Yeah, I think that
I can look myself here. Hold on while I check.
Yeah, we're lucky we're getting him for this, Barbara. Pretty soon we're not going to be able to get Eli Cranor for live streams.
We're going to have to smack him down so he doesn't get too big ahead. But anyway, let me read you, because it's a really nice recommendation made by a bookseller in Little Rock, Arkansas. Wow, this Southern noir thriller is ripping. Blood is thicker than water in these Ozark towns, but family relationships are complicated, and there are no easy answers, leading to hard and surprising choices. Absolutely unforgettable. So Eli and I will be talking in April, or maybe you'll be talking to Patrick, who'll probably steal you from me. He does that, right? Because he's the noir guy. But anyway, I get Eli tonight and I get Sean tonight, so it's all wonderful. Are you prepared with brilliant questions and so forth, or do you want me to natter on a bit? What would you like, Eli?
Yeah, we can natter around a little bit. I would like to say though, before we even get going, Sean and I both have the bald thing going, and we met at BoucherCon. When was that? September? That was the first time we met in real life. Yeah. And twice, 2 distinct times over the 3-day span that I was in Minnesota, I had somebody come up behind me, two different women, put their hand on my shoulder and say, "Sean?" And then I'd turn around and they would be like, "Oh, you're not Sean." Like a beard in their face. And yeah, but Sean and I are both taller than average and
what used to happen at BoucherCon, like back a few years ago, people would come up to me and say, "Are you Harlan Coben?" And I would have to disappoint them and say, "No, I'm only Sean Doolittle." And now they come up to me and say, "Are you Eli Cranor?" And I still have to disappoint them.
You just can't get away from Eli, can you? No. So just a few words about Sean here. He's the critically acclaimed author of 8 standalone crime and suspense novels, which have received the Berry Award and the International Thriller Writers Award, among other honors. He's a native of Nebraska, and he lives in Western Iowa. My father grew up in Ames, Iowa, Perry, Iowa, which is over east, isn't it?
I don't know where Perry is. I'll have to look that up, but Ames isn't so far from us, about 2 hours, I guess.
Okay. So are you unhappy that you're losing the first crack at the presidential, whatever it is? It's been a tug of war, hasn't it?
That's definitely a big change. And there's, I suppose, plenty of things to be unhappy about, depending on what side of different issues you fall on. But I guess we just keep on going, right?
Yes. Well, we're a politics-free zone here. So yes. We decided that we were a bookstore that was engaged in entertainment rather than
wise.
Well, our big thing is commercial fiction. So I think that if you're expecting people to come in and enjoy it, then you then you need to make it a fun experience and not, one where everybody gets excited. Besides, Arizona is so weird. We have Kari Lake, and you couldn't write a thriller with Kari Lake in it. It would be any weirder than she is. So now I've been political, right? Right there. You already
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's kind of a national embarrassment.
Review your own terms and conditions, Barbara.
Yeah, well, there you are. So I did see Eli, and then I will be quiet, but there was a really interesting interview with John in, I think, The Big Thrill. But it might have been but I think it was The Big Thrill. And anyway, the question was asked, can you pinpoint a moment or incident that sparked the idea for this book, Device Free Weekend? Do you remember what you said? Because if you don't, I happen to have it right here.
I kind of don't. What did I say?
All right, you said novels generally come together for me when ideas from different places start sticking together. The basics for Device Free Weekend involved a news story I read about restaurants that take patrons' mobile phones at the door. Now, that's not just The Glass Onion, but there's a chef, a movie about a chef, a TV thing. I can't think of what it was called.
Are you thinking of The Menu?
Yes, exactly. And the same thing, right?
Another, yeah.
And basically, when they take your device away, they leave you what? Powerless, uncommunicative, helpless, no
We're
way
sort of
to
lost without them, aren't we? Yeah.
Well, but there's no like 911 or, it really makes you vulnerable in a way that I find is very unsettling and, interesting for what you're writing about. Anyway, takes patrons' mobile phones at the door, followed by a couple of different travel-related stories about various device-free destination packages. All these stories shared a theme of people yearning to disconnect from our connected world for a while. Add to that my own experiences with technology, particularly social media. There, Eli, you have something to explore already. And the reflection on earlier times that comes with aging and Device-Free Weekend started to shape up. So you brought a lot of different things together to get inspired for this novel.
Yeah, I'm glad that I said all of that. That sounds about like what I would have said tonight if you'd asked me the same question. So I guess I'm keeping my story straight. But yeah, I mean, it was just a few different things that I saw that kind of came together all at the same time as I was sort of, I've kind of, it took me a while to find my own comfort level with social media and how to be a happy citizen on social media and not spend the whole day wound up about one thing or another, or angry about one thing or another, or, whatever. And, as I was looking for what my next book idea was going to be, I thought, well, what do I care about now? What things concern me? What things interest me? And what I discovered is the thing that I spend a lot of my time thinking about now is what people are saying or believing or doing on social media. And that combined with things I was seeing elsewhere in the culture about people like you mentioned, feeling a desire to kind of get away from, being plugged in. That just all seemed to fit together and click in a way that started to feel like a book.
I have to say that while I don't do any personal social media, so I spare myself a lot of grief. I have people, as they say in Hollywood, I have people that do social media for the store. When my husband and I went off to sail in a yacht around French Polynesia, Tahiti and so forth, I thought I was actually going to have like an 8 or 10 day break. And, because there isn't a publicist in New York that doesn't think I'm online 24/7. Or the whole thing. And, I wanted to just toss it to the sharks. I really did at one point think.
Well, it becomes hard to disconnect, especially, when you're busy and people want your attention. I mean, it's hard to look away.
But there's every day is really 24, a 24-hour day, 7 days a week.
Well, even within my own family, I tend to, when I get home, I tend to get very sloppy about leaving my phone in another room, or spending time in one part of the house while my phone is still out in my truck, or wherever. And even in my own family, I mean, that's how we communicate. If I don't have my phone in front of me, one of my kids could be trying to get a hold of me, my wife could be trying to get a hold of me. Even at home, you have to stay connected.
And they expect an instant response. All right, I've nattered long enough, Eli. So over to you.
Yeah, well, I'll play off this whole theme. So before Don't Know Tough came out, I self-published a book called Books Make Brains Taste Bad. And it was a middle grade book inspired by like my love of Goosebumps growing up, like R.L. Stein Goosebumps.
Yeah.
And the whole premise, Sean, was there was this school where it was like Fahrenheit 451, books had been outlawed. And anyway, come to find out the school's run by zombies and they're using like VR headsets. I wrote this in the throes of the pandemic. So they're using headsets to educate the students, but they're actually frying their brains like deep fried like chicken so they can eat them. And the only way the students can save themselves is by reading real books, because books make brains taste bad.
Because it toughens up the brain muscle.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's like a workout, for your brain. So I just, and I got to go around to like elementary schools. Both my parents are public school teachers, and I am a public school teacher, and so I remember one thing. This was mainly, like third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And I would ask these kids at the end of like this presentation, which was just about reading, like, the power of reading. I would ask them at the end, raise your hand if you take a screen to bed. So it could be like have a TV on, have a laptop, have a tablet, a phone. And so these are like 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. It was like over 95%, and my wife works in the medical field. She's a nurse practitioner for pediatrics. And one of the biggest things she sees is, like kids can't sleep. And then it leads to everything else. It leads to obesity. It leads to depression. It leads to all this stuff. So anyway, I say all that to say, like, you have the book is kind of candy coated in this way of like commercial fiction, but there's some really deep philosophical insights into the, I think you have that bit where like if you knew when you made the atom bomb, like what the problems were going to be, what the damage would be. But if you make social media, you don't necessarily know that, and that's one of the big, questions of the whole book is, which way, or what would you do? So yeah, I just wanted to say that to you. I mean, where do you stand, like beyond just your own like family and like, as an author navigating social media, but you really play off and not to give any spoilers, but what do you think this has done to us as humans? What do you think this stuff, how has it changed us?
It's really interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I do think a lot of this has to do with how technology is conditioning us to consume, process, use information. I'll bet your wife has probably seen something like this happen. I remember when one of my nephews was maybe like 2 years old or something, just kind of toddling around. Everybody was over to the house for Thanksgiving. And I remember watching him go up to our coffee table where we had some magazines sitting out. And he was like trying to pinch zoom and tap on this magazine because like, as far in his experience, it should do something when you tap on it, right? Because it, and like a hard copy magazine sort of befuddled him. And that whole thing about taking screens to bed. A lot of people say don't look at screens for 30 minutes before bed or whatever if you want to sleep better. And then other studies that show like there's a documentary out there called The Social Dilemma. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that documentary kind of gets into the way some of these platforms are designed to be addictive. I mean, the way they release dopamine in our brains is sort of like very carefully calculated and tweaked for maximum, engagement. And all of that adds up, when I can feel, I don't know how you feel, Eli, like you read a lot of books. I read a lot of books. Barbara, your life is books, but I can feel my own attention span shortening.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know where, like, I don't know where those comments go, or I don't have any definitive statement to make about it, but it is part of what I wanted to be sort of woven into the book, was just this idea of, technology will have an inevitable impact on us and on society. What is it? Is it good, bad? How are we changing?
Yeah, man, definitely. I you know, I I got to interview Lisa Unger back like in the summer. And so we had a really good conversation. And as she put me on
Was
this
that for
book,
Secluded Cabin Sleep 6?
no, well, it was just for my shop talk deal with,
Oh, okay.
so I was, just talking craft and how we do what you do, which plays off of what you were just saying. This idea that we are authors, and to be an author, it takes immense amounts of solitude and quiet. And right when I was getting to her, so it was the summer and my debut had come out like in the spring, and I was still kind of coming off of this, like wanting to go check, like Amazon reviews or, my social media to see like what new thing somebody had said, which it was just making me sick because here I was trying to write the next book. And every 15 minutes, it was like an alarm was going off in my head, to like,
Right. Go check. Yep.
Thing. And I'd never been that way before. I held on to like a flip phone, for like a long time, which was like enough that I could call somebody if something bad happened. But it wasn't like I was just going to be glued to it because it was too cumbersome. But Lisa put me on this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Because when I was telling her this stuff, she was like, absolutely not. Like you cannot be an author, and be writing a scene and every 10 minutes jump across. And she wasn't probably that hardcore about it, but it struck me. And so this book, it's like a self-help kind of book, just talking about regaining like deep focus. And it's kind of like a workout, like if you know about weightlifting or any of that stuff, a lot of those strength gains come in the last set, like the last rep, like once you've torn everything else down. And I think a lot of that's true with what we do. You get into a scene, you stay in it for so long, and then that's when the good stuff comes. And so if you're jumping in and out,
Right.
so I wondered if you did any stuff, I'm always interested in talking craft, like leaving your phone in the truck and stuff. Do you have any tips or anything for people out there, readers who are wanting to regain focus? Because I know it happens to me with reading books too. I'll read a couple of pages and then think, oh, I'm going to check, something over here. And it's a very dangerous thing for our industry because, it's pulling readers away. The screen calls to so many. So do you have any tips or tricks or things you do to stay in the moment?
Well, I don't have any like life-changing tips and tricks, but I do. I in my younger years, I used to write very late at night, and as I've gotten older, I've had to convert to becoming an early morning writer because I'm no good.
I know.
And what I found, especially like with Device Free Weekend, that and here again, there are some studies that talk about like, the distance between, when you wake up from sleep, you're still kind of in a creative, dreamy sort of state that can be conducive to writing. And I find that it is. And the surest way to shatter that sort of warm, golden, fertile moment is to start by checking Twitter. Or whatever. So like I have a pretty strict rule about like when I get up in the morning and I come in here and I sit down in the chair and I've got my coffee and I'm ready to go, get right into the book. Don't check the internet first because that just destroys the spell, So like I guess that's one thing that I would say is what you're alluding to is keep that deep focus moment those moments separate from your scrolling moments, because I had the same experience that you had, Eli. Like, you find yourself just like you can't stop checking even after you start to feel a little gross and you start to feel a little full. You just keep eating.
Yeah.
Madness lies in checking Amazon reviews. Shame on you, both of you.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, they're going to give you 1 star because the book was later. They didn't like the price. That's just, ridiculous.
That's something that I find. One thing that I like about getting a little older, Barbara, is that I find it a little easier to not look. Like when I was starting out, Eli, 1 or 2 books in, I couldn't not look for that stuff. I mean, come on, how do you ignore what people are saying about your books? But
Right.
I find it's getting a little bit easier in my 50s than it was when I was in my 30s.
Yeah, man. No, I mean, for me, it's like you write in the dark for so long. Like my mom, my wife, like they're the only people that would ever read or have anything to say about. So just the fact that anybody's saying anything, like I'm an old football coach and quarterback. So like I have thick skin. Like it doesn't really, none of them really bother me one way or the other. But I am addicted to just being in the conversation, like and hearing that. But I also wanted to make a shout out to Sean and I have the same agent. So David Hell Smith is out there.
Yeah.
David, if you're out there, hello. We're representing, yep, DHS. But David, when I first signed on with David, I remember he had this great thing he said about commercial fiction. David's a commercial fiction guy. He said something that really stuck with me. And I think he was actually talking about like Ace Atkins books. But he said, what he liked the most about Ace and about stuff that really appealed to David was that it was current and that it was candy coated in like a digestible way, like something that could go down easy. But once it was inside, it had jagged edges. Like once that candy coating came off, it had jagged edges. And I've really that has really stuck with me, from David. So we've been talking kind of about not necessarily the candy coating of Device Free Weekend, but we've been talking about what I think would draw a lot of people in. This idea of. But I also wanted to go into this book's story to publication because I kind of know this story, right? So I mean, if there's any writers that are out here, I mean, this book had a long road to get to where it is, right? And I don't know how much you want to share that, but it was a long run in there.
Well, it was certainly. I mean, there was certainly a long period between selling it and publication.
Yeah.
But like in terms of my own career, it was a long road, I guess, from there to here, just because I had a sort of a first phase of my career where I did 6 books, and then hit a little patch of burnout and like kind of felt the need to try writing some other things, and spent a few years doing that. And this is the first Device Free Weekend is the first time I kind of like have been back in that big thriller sort of mode. And in fact, I've never really been in this kind of mode before. My earlier books usually were a little, the story scope was a little smaller. It was smaller in size. The people and what they were up to was a little bit smaller. Yeah. Not like change the whole world stakes. But I wanted to try that. I wanted to try a bigger book. I wanted to try something that had a little bit more candy coating, as you say, and a little bit a broader, bigger scope. And so, this was my pandemic book. Everyone wrote a book during the pandemic, right? This one was mine. And it was very fortunate to get picked up at Grand Central, but they had a plan for how to position it, and that plan was 2023. And so, that was plenty of time for things like Glass Onion to come out or, whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing, particularly interesting in that other than, you really have to just keep on, if you spend all your time waiting to see what's going to happen with the book that you just finished, you're not going to make much progress on whatever book is next. And so I think the key to, my advice to any younger writers out there would be start working on the next thing and just keep your head down like you've done, Eli, and just, keep writing, keep working.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's the thing for those of you who haven't read the book that are listening, there's so much, and this I'm gonna ask you a question about research here. Like this book takes place on, this remote private island, much like Glass Onion, but there's so much like technology, and there's so much really vivid descriptors, about how this house that's out there works, and the tunnel systems that are in there. Not, again, try not to do any spoilers, but I mean, what did you do for research, man? I mean, or did you research, or how did you get into the world of this, this sort of money, like this high? Because that's always really interesting to me when we start talking about, you get quotes about like Jeff Bezos, and like what percentage of his money is like, $50 million, and it'd be like, 10 cents of my money, and that's the kind of people, or at least one person in your novel that we're dealing with here. So how did you get into that?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I tend to get hung up on, like, I tend to spend more research on, like there's a scene in the book where a character has to get from one place to another in a boat during a storm, and he's got to pass through a lock system to get where he's going. And I will get really hung up on, like, okay, what do they do if there's lightning? Like, what time is the lock open? What time is it closed? Like those tiny little details that add verisimilitude to things. I spend more time researching that stuff, I would say, than the big like world of technology. For that stuff, like my preference, I mean, I work in tech, and so I've got a little bit of a sense of, what a product development in a technology company is like, enough to fake it, certainly. And we all have phones, we know how they work, we all use computers, we know how they work. I think if you put your imagination to work, you can kind of extrapolate what things might be able to do in a year, 2, 3, 4 from now. What I did not want to happen was to be so well versed in the ins and outs of technology that this thriller novel that I'm writing becomes a user manual or something like that. Like I didn't want to bog the story down with too much technology research, but I did want the tech stuff that's in there to feel believable.
Yeah.
So is the smart house that you created, is it based on anything real, or did you just imagine that,
Well, I used what I did know from our current home automation technology and thought, well, gosh, if somebody had enough money, they probably could implement or install something like, the things that Ryan's house can do. And, and I'm aware of how satellites work, and I'm aware of generally of how the internet works, and what we can do online and what you can accomplish. And so I think for that kind of stuff, I kind of kept the research a little bit lighter. But I will spend a day researching, like, okay, how fast can a 800 horsepower boat travel? How long would it take to get from this place to that place? Or how, I don't know, those little details that seem unimportant, but when they're wildly wrong, can really destroy the spell of reality that you're trying to create. I'll spend quite a bit of time researching what feels like not a very important point in the book, just to kind of, to keep that spell intact as much as possible.
Well, we're living in an era where somebody can hijack your house. Actually, there was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about electric cars and the fact that, you can be hijacked in your car. Somebody can hack into it because it's basically a traveling computer.
Yeah,
And
it's comforting, isn't
an
it?
effective kidnapping operation, you're trapped inside your vehicle, the whole bit. And, if you have a smart house and, all those systems, in fact, they really can be hacked. So,
That's
I'm
true.
cautioned in that sense. I'd rather have a key to my door than, all that fancy stuff.
In terms of the wealth aspect, like to my knowledge, I don't know any billionaires. I'm certainly not close friends with any billionaires. But I I do have close friends, and I have people that I met in college, and I know what it's like to reunite with somebody that you haven't met for 20 years. And I've been around people of wealth enough to kind of like see what the superficial trappings of lifestyles of the rich and famous might be. So like when I approached this book, I was approaching, the characters in this book met in college in the early 90s, which is when I went to school and when I met my college friends. And they met in the time right before the internet kind of became a prevalent part of society. And I remember that transition and what that was like. And I'm always fascinated by, the rich guy in the book, Ryan Cloverhill. I don't know what Ryan Cloverhill's daily life is like, but I know what it's like to reunite with somebody that you haven't seen in 20 years. And whatever twists and turns your lives have taken and whatever relative social status you have, I'm always interested in how you immediately revert back to the interpersonal dynamic that you had with that person when you left off. So I wanted to play with that dynamic a little bit of, people who were the closest of friends at one time in life, whose their lives have changed a lot over 25 years, but when they get back together, it's 1992 again. And here they are on this island with no internet, just like it was back in the college dorm. And I wanted their interpersonal dynamic to feed from that personal history more than their current lives.
Yeah, that was it for me. So it was the candy coating of, device free weekend, billionaire, private island. That's what gets you in on the cover. And then when you got in there, it was just like, like an episode of Friends or something, where you had these really strong relationships. And the 90s were, I was an early 2000s guy, with my youth generation. But I knew enough about it. I was around enough that, man, like it really felt like a love letter. And I think I've said that to you, and that you're starting to see more of that. Like you're starting to see that stuff coming through in popular culture more and more, like looking back at the 90s and really, because I hear these things now where it's like the 90s were just as far away now as as the 70s were, in 2000.
That kind of perspective stuff just always blows my mind.
Yeah, man. And so I just wanted to really, give you a shout out on the character building and the tension that you did, because you've got this billionaire and then what you just said. I have those friends, who you see after 10 years and it's like time just disappears.
Right.
But then also have those friends that you see after 10 years and it's like you don't even know them anymore. And you do a really good job of having both of that kind of group, like there's shards of those people. So that friendship dynamic, that was really cool, man.
Well, I appreciate that. That talking about, nostalgia and when is it time to start looking back at a decade? The part of the reason this book is set in the Pacific Northwest is from my own experience when I was a Nebraska kid going to college in the early 90s. I remember I took a trip to Seattle during this was like during peak Seattle when grunge was starting to take over the world. Right. And everybody was thinking and talking about Seattle. And I remember going to Seattle and like having my first cup of Starbucks coffee and like, seeing this new place. And it was a very formative trip at a formative time in my life when I was, expanding my horizons a little bit in school and learning new things. And so as I started looking back at those experiences, that seemed like the most appropriate time for these characters to be looking back on too, because it comes from my own experience. And, obviously there's the tech culture and tech world out there anyway. So that all fit. But yeah, it's, we went through a period of kind of 80s nostalgia a little while back, and now maybe it's time for 90s nostalgia. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think
Well, I'm
that's
not going to
fine.
comment on this conversation since 1950s, guys. Come on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think about that, like, the early 90s for my kids is like the 50s for me. I mean, it's,
No, I know, but I actually did go to college in the 50s. So, for me, the 90s seems like, yesterday.
well, does your college time in the 50s now, I mean, I'm sure it feels like the distant past in some ways, but does it still feel like accessible to you, Barbara, in your
Well, I
mind?
spent a lot of my life in college and graduate school and so forth. And yeah, no, I can remember the thing that was interesting about going to Stanford in 1958 was leaving in 1963 with a master's degree, and the revolution that occurred in San Francisco in that 5 years was so extraordinary that you'd hardly recognize it. My husband's 5 years younger than I am, and he's really a child of the 60s. And I'm really a child of the 50s, and he's closer in spirit to my kids who
Yeah.
are, children of the 70s or 80s. There's an enormous difference between the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and I lived through it. I mean, I look at all this stuff going around us. I'll come back to politics and remind everybody that I lived through McCarthy. I was through the blacklist, and I mean, it was right over the border in Wisconsin, because I grew up in Winnetka, which is a suburb of Chicago. And, there was a long spell there when we thought that terrible things were happening and there was no way out. It was very depressing. And, it informs my view of politics today. One of the things I do remember is that eventually you move past it into some other synthesis. It's just living through it. That's
Right.
really hard. As an historian, I remind people that it was a 20-year war between England and France that wasn't decided until Waterloo. Literally was not decided until the last minute at Waterloo who was going to win. 20 years. And then you read Jane Austen and you have no clue at all that there's even a war going on in the background.
Right.
So that's a long period of uncertainty, with the world order. So we're a year into the Ukraine war. And
yeah, I mean, it does feel to me anyway, like, what you said about decade, the 40s feeling very different from the 50s. I've thought about that too. Like, for me anyway, the mid 80s feels night and day different than the mid 90s. 2005 doesn't feel quite so different to me than 2015, but I think 2025 is going to feel a lot different. We seem to be in another kind of transition period. I mean, the period of this book when these characters met, I think, was another kind of transition period where they were, we were coming out of the late 80s into the 90s. Again, music was changing. The internet was not far away. And once the internet, came to everyone, then everything started really changing at an accelerated pace. So, 1999 feels very different to me than 1989. And I think we're going to look back on this period too, the same way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you can kind of track how people are feeling about the world if you look at what thrillers were published when, how they hold up and so forth. I think we should emphasize in talking about Device-Free Weekend that the people who went to the island did not go there to escape their devices. That was not their intention. It was forced upon them when they got.
In fact, a couple of the characters very much would like to not give up their devices. But yeah, they were going at the invitation of an old friend, and that was his requirement, which maybe should have been a clue for them. I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, I think, of course, I'd seen The Glass Onion, so now I was already alert to that. But no, I think you're right that it should have been a clue that there was going to be an agenda different than what they had expected. But of course, that doesn't mean they could have anticipated the full agenda.
Well, I was at the BoucherCon that Eli mentioned, where Eli and I met.
Minneapolis, right.
I was on a panel about locked room stories, which I guess Device Free Weekend could roughly qualify um, as a locked room story. And the way, like, this is exaggerating things a little bit, but there's a sense where it almost kind of feels like all you need to do to lock somebody in a room now is take their phone away.
Yeah, well, that's a term that is totally misused. Locked room means in mysterydom, it means that there's an impossible crime that will occur.
Sure.
If the room was locked down and somebody's dead inside and there was no egress or ingress, then so the whole thrust of a book about a locked room is how did it happen? And how did it happen?
The term's gotten a little loose
Why
here.
did it?
Yeah.
What you're talking about is the closed circle. It's Agatha Christie, and then there were none. It's the country house murder. It's the cabin on the ship, or the old theater, or Nero Wolfe in the banquet room, or and you do that to have an impermeable border so that only the people in that place can be the suspects for whatever is going on.
Right. But I mean, I'm sure in all the authors that you've talked to over the years, like, I'm sure you remember hearing people say, like, a few years ago, I remember writers were kind of concerned with how cell phones were affecting plots because it was harder to it was harder to put people in jeopardy when everybody was able to just pull a phone out of their pocket and call for help. But now I think we're seeing writers go the other way, where we use that technology as a plot point, or whether we can communicate or not seems to be a common plot device in fiction now.
Well, it really is. Any self-respecting criminal, the first thing they ought to think about is leaving their cell phone at home.
That's right.
Before they head out for their criminous act. I mean, you saw it with the January 6th thing. We had a small riot here in Scottsdale where a bunch of guys from Phoenix thought they could, batter their way into the iStore, the Mercedes dealer, and so forth. And 100% of them got caught because they all brought their cell phones with them, so they could post their stuff on social media, or their, could be tracked or something. You think, hello. So I don't think that, I think authors are a step ahead of criminals.
Yeah, maybe so.
Authors have worked out, what they need to do, leaving the criminals far behind. It's true. But you're right. They have to be part of the fabric of the story now because they are ubiquitous.
And I think it's easy to talk about technology and social media and whatever as a bad thing, or a potentially sinister thing, or a potentially problematic thing. But for all that can bother me about social media, it's also great. I mean, Eli, you and I have gotten to know each other through social media. When we were all locked down because of a virus, that was the only way we had to keep in touch with people. Great technology facilitates great things all the time, and I wanted that to be part of the book too, not just a horror story about how terrible social media is, but to also address the fact that much of what we do in our lives now wasn't even possible before some of this technology existed. And so it's that tension between the benefits and the pitfalls that interest me.
Yeah. Well, and you just what you were talking about earlier, like you spend all this time researching, how a boat goes up a lock with the lightning strike. Like, what are you doing that research on? What are we all doing? We're not traveling to the lock and dam and having an interview.
If I open one of these doors behind me, there's a drawer filled with old maps from AAA that I used to collect as a writer. Because if I was setting a story somewhere else, like I needed maps for reference. Now you can drive across this country without ever leaving your computer.
Yeah.
Or you can have it talk you into going somewhere. You can go, hey, Google, and give it an address, and then it actually talks to you while you're driving, which is actually a lot safer than if you're trying to study a map or watch the GPS thing unfold. So it does bring you more safety in some respects. But on the other hand, if you're behind somebody at a green arrow and they're sitting through it, it's because they're looking at their phone and they're not looking at the traffic light and you want to kill them.
That's right. That's right. Talking about, college in the early 90s versus now, like I remember, doing research for a paper, you would go to the library and they would have these tall canvas Santa Claus sacks that you could fit like, I don't know, 25 books in, and you would check out everything you wanted, fill up one of these canvas bags and lug it back to wherever you were working. And my kids, I don't know if they even go to the library to write papers anymore. They can do it all from their computer.
I don't know. So Eli, how are things in the Ozarks? Do you find that cell phones are just as ubiquitous in the Ozarks? No, I'm serious.
Now we just got shoes a couple years ago, shoes and real automobiles.
Right, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
I thought there were places where you could have gaps due to the,
Oh
cover.
yeah. I'm just playing, Barbara. I get that. I really do get that though. Like if I go places, I went to school down in Boca Raton for a year to play football at Florida Atlantic University. And I remember I was the only dude from Arkansas on the team because there's a lot of good football in South Florida. And I remember, these players kind of looking at me sideways and being like, I had really long hair at the time. I was getting the most out of my hair while I had it. And I remember them like looking at me sideways and being like, you guys wear shoes in Arkansas. And so that has really been funny. But no, like where I live out on a lake. It's what I always tell people is it's true grit country. So Charles Portis's great novel, True Grit, Matty Ross is from Dardanelle, from Yell County. So that is literally my backyard, looking across Lake Dardanelle, right here. And we do cell phones. I mean, like where I'm at my house, there are spots around here where service will kind of go in and out.
That's right.
Yeah, but I do. I mean, I teach online now to kids in like our juvenile correctional facilities here in Arkansas. I teach English 11 and 12, and the thing that is really like talk about change and what's coming. This chat bot crap. Like they started doing that before it was running like on the national news stuff. Like there were these papers that were coming through. And they weren't plagiarized, but like I knew, like beyond a shadow of a doubt, I was like, this sucker didn't write this. Like, like where the hell did this come from? Because so they were ahead of us on all that stuff. But it makes me think, Sean, like just what you were talking about like research and how like if I think back to like Elmore Leonard, a dude who never owned a computer, who wrote all of his manuscripts longhand. And if he knew, like how much I used a computer to like make what I make, would he think I was cheating? Like, and so.
Well, I think Leonard had a researcher who went out.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So yeah, if I had some dude to go run down to Guatemala and tell me what that one shop looks like, and bring back some pictures.
Am I making this up, or do you write longhand, right?
Yeah, and that was like this. I do it, and it's all Elmore Leonard inspired. So it's unlined, yellow.
So talking about technology and how it changes the way we process things, or not, or whatever. So I'd love to hear you talk about like in your brain creatively, what's the benefit of that manual, like getting in with the pen and the paper, versus composing on a computer or transcribing once you've written it on, like how, if you're working just on a computer versus writing by hand the way you do, like how do you feel technology impacting what you do creatively?
Definitely. So I do. This is I have to special order these pads that don't have any lines, and that was an Elmore Leonard thing. And I think it's like the epigraph in Fahrenheit 451, if they give you lined paper, turn it sideways, and like write. So there's the part with having no lines and just being able to kind of, write, that helps. But I do all of that at like 5 in the morning. I have two kids. If y'all can hear them, I'm sorry. They're running around like crazy. They got mama pinned up there. Daddy's not on duty to keep them in check. So I write from 5 to 7, and I write like that's where I do like the real kind of digging up of creating stuff. And then these little things, they have this little fold out, so like I can prop them up, and then that's as I type it in, there's like a whole nother layer of writing. So if I need something to research, I'll just put like 3 X's. And then when I come back to that space, like what you said, like I've already checked my Twitter for the day or checked my email, at 8 o'clock. I spend the rest of the day, getting those 5 or 6 pages transcribed into the computer around classes or lunch breaks or whatever. But I'm kind of staying in that headspace the whole time. But it's those 2 hours each morning where it's like, it's completely uninterrupted. It's quiet. It's dark. I wear noise canceling headphones, so there's some technology, thrown in it. But yeah, what I find is that the manuscripts go in different places, and I don't always do that. If I feel like I usually do that on a book where I'm trying to be maybe more literary, or I'm trying to add a different quality to each line. But if it's a bigger concept sort of book, I will write it, just on by as fast as I can, by typing it straight in. So that's what I always find is different. And like I write a weekly column for our state paper. I always type those. I write the Crime Reads interviews, for Shop Talk. I always type those. So it's just that one specific kind of writing that I feel like I have to kind of go dig it up, each morning.
Well, that's what you're saying. What you just said is kind of getting to the heart of my question, I guess, not to make this an interview with you or about you, but I'm really interested. So when you talked about using the notepad, you used the word writing. And when you talked about using the computer, you used the word typing. When you transcribe that work into the computer, is it just a tool to get it into a digital format for you? Or does the facility that a word processor brings to the process, does that create anything new for you, like creative, like you end up creating more when you can do it easier, or
Yeah. So it does. It almost, I mean, there are passages that come from the writing of longhand that go straight in and that are perfect. But as I'm transcribing it, it's kind of a laborious process. And so I'll end up, adding a whole big section of stuff in there that wasn't in there when I was in that first draft. But it's a pain in the ass. I mean, really and truly, because I'll usually aim to write about 5 pages, which ends up being about 1,000 words, in that 2 hours. And just getting those 1,000 words like into the computer, it really takes me, about all day, to kind of get that in there. And
do you kind of consider that like a revision pass when you're doing that?
Yeah, I guess. And I've got this weird thing where I read everything I write out loud to my mom at night. So once the kids go to bed, I call her and I read her like those 1,000 words out loud. And so that's definitely like where I finally make sure that everything is right, and like for that day, that scene, those 5 pages are right. So, and it's a perfect echo chamber because I've never written anything that my mom doesn't think is just the best damn thing that's ever been written in the whole world.
I think my mom would stop taking my calls about
No, so I go to bed every night, Sean, and I'm like, this is the best damn thing I've ever written in my life, and then I wake up at 5 o'clock and I'm like, okay, let's go. But what about you? Are you straight in on a computer?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like went all in on composing on that. Like very early, like my very first writing when I was coming out of high school, I did on a manual typewriter. I've never written longhand. And when I switched to a computer, it was a lot easier to push those keys. So like I don't feel like I can compose longhand because my brain is so attuned to that process of composing on a computer. And I'm pretty messy, and I do a lot of tweaking and deleting and like shifting things around, and like probably overwork things a lot of the time, which is one of the things a word processor lets you do. Sometimes I wonder, would I be more precise if I had to get it if I had to get a line right with my bare hands, would I be more precise?
Yeah, but here's the thing, you have to be able to read your own handwriting in order to do what.
That's another problem I would have.
Mine is illegible. So, I never was any good at doing all this. But I find, interestingly enough, if I'm working in a Word document and then it transfers over to email or whatever, or if I'm got an email thing and I'm transferring it back to Word, that it's entirely different. Just shifting the two screens makes a difference.
Yeah, Barbara, that's for one of the things, one of my favorite, I can't remember who told me this, but I didn't come up with it. But anytime like you're having to go back and do a fresh read, change the font and change the size of the font.
Right.
So that way all the words move on the document. You're not looking at the same words, in the same spot where you start to scan over that stuff. And that was just what you're talking about. I mean, it just makes it all. It makes it all so
Yeah,
much.
even the review function in Word, it's amazing as you're clicking through. I just finished, I spent my whole life writing, not creatively, but otherwise I just finished my newsletter. And as I'm going through, with the review process, I see stuff. I see words I missed, or, it
Right.
helps. Every once in a while, they'll say, no, dummy, you spelled Callanan with an I and it's really an A, it helps you there. But it's really, I thought one of the most interesting tips I ever heard, then we're going to call up Jacob, was David Morrell and I were in his writer's studio in Santa Fe, and he'd been working on a novel. But because when he sold First Blood to Hollywood, he sold away everything. There's a lot of things he isn't allowed to do because, they already own this character. So he was working along on some book and suddenly realized that he was using a name that he couldn't use. And so, he thought of another name and he did a global search and replace for the name, and the book that had been just driving him crazy, he could magically came to life with a new name. And it was like, wow, a complete reboot. So that's one of his writer's tips. If you really get stuck, just rename them.
Yeah.
And, all of a sudden, the guy that was Pete becomes Harry or something. And wow, it's really different.
Well, all of this stuff we're talking about we're really just talking about tricking our brains, right? And that's, that's like there again, going back to that, how is technology conditioning the way we think is a very interesting topic, I think.
It is. Well, we need to call Jacob up, but let me just, in a brief summary, say that what happens here is a group of friends are invited by their buddy to his private island in the Northwest, off Seattle, apparently. And when they get there, they think it's going to be sort of an old buddies weekend, but all of a sudden it becomes a device-free weekend. And then things happen. And it happens unexpectedly. There's some really exciting scenes having to do with weather. There's exciting scenes having to do with medical stuff. There's a whole lot of exciting scenes. So it's a very interesting book, and it doesn't go quite where you think it is. So I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks for having us. Eli, you've got young kids. It's dinner time. I really appreciate setting aside.
We have to bring up Jacob. Jacob,
Okay.
come out from behind the screen and tell us if you have any questions. I love the way he does this. I feel like Shakespeare, and it's the Tempest. And I just brought up, when it's Patrick, I say to him, are you Ariel or Caliban? It depends on the day.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Eli. We have a few questions and comments from our Facebook stream. This one's from Stephen. Aside from each other, what writers are engaging your interest these days?
You want to take this, Eli?
Oh yeah, I've got some. So Everybody Knows by Jordan Harper. I read that book early last year and it just blew my socks off. I mean, it's just a whole subculture that I did not know existed in LA, and the way things could possibly, I don't know if they really worked the way Jordan, put them in there. I know it's a novel, but damn, it just opened my eyes, and I've loved Jordan's style. Jordan's actually from Missouri. So just a couple of hours north of where I am in Arkansas, but has been, ingrained in LA. And that book, I love the way Jordan writes. He's got this very, Elroy-esque style that's just like a gut punch on every line. That's great. Kelly Jo Ford is a lady out of Arkansas. She's got a great book, just came out this past year, Real Bad Things. So those were really good. 5 Decembers, loved 5 Decembers last year. Sean Cosby, so good on everything he does, and I haven't got to read his new one yet. And I'm dying to read that. So Sean, if you're out there, man, send me a book. But yeah, I think that, and then the one random one that's like not a current deal is Walter Tevis. So Walter Tevis wrote The Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
He wrote The Hustler, The Color of Money, and those I just randomly stumbled upon those books, and they were as good as anything I've ever read.
I thought
Just
that
so
The
good.
Queen's Gambit was marvelous on television. I really liked the actress that did it. And I thought they
Oh
really got the spirit of the books so well.
yeah, so good. What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I think I wanted you to go first because I thought you were going to have a better, you'd be better at quickly naming some of the people of your, what I would kind of consider your generation of writers. I think I feel like there's a crop of newer folks out there that are 1, 2, 3 books in, and you
Yeah.
mentioned a few of them already, and you are one of them as well, Eli, who I see a lot of talk. I see a lot of, kind of buzz and hype on the internet and on social media. And then I'll eventually go and check out one of your books. And I've been very impressed with how they consistently live up to the chatter. So like I would echo some of the names that you already laid out there. And then, some of the people that have been around for a while are still, the Laura Lippmans and the Megan Abbotts and the Allison Galens and the Alfair Burks, and they're all still doing great work, some of the best work they've done, I believe. And one of my favorites, Dennis Lehane, I just read his new book that's going to be coming out in, I don't know when, maybe this month or next month.
Now it's coming out in April because Dennis is signing a whole ton of them for us, and I'll be doing a Zoom conversation with him.
Great. Well,
On April 27th, I can already tell you when.
The news is he still got it, right?
I don't know.
Still
I haven't
doing
read it yet.
vital, important, work that kind of punches you in the gut, I'm really enjoying catching up, and learning about the new voices, like Eli's, and then also, the people that kind of have been around for a while are still doing really strong work too. So there's just all kinds of stuff out. It feels like a very, very strong time for crime fiction to me, generally.
Yes, I agree very much so. Jacob?
John, let me echo something there, man. You talked about, like hearing about it and then getting it. So the first time I heard of Device Free Weekend, I was in Dallas with David and Victor. And we both know Victor Gischler, and he's not the most like glowing guy but he was going on and on about Device Free Weekend. And this was way early, like before advanced copies or anything like that. And so then when I got the early copy, it was the same thing, man. It was just like everything he had laid like all these things out, about what he really loved about it. And then it was everything. Now here we go.
I'll send Victor his cash later on.
Some flowers, yep, some roses, yellow roses.
Well, Sean, did you want to talk a little bit about your tech background and maybe how that informed your writing of this book? And also, do your previous novels have a technological crutch, or is this one unique in that way?
This one is unique. It's unique in the, like I said before, in the scope and the size. I mean, the plot of this book affects the globe, not just a small group of characters in a specific location. And it's the first book that I've done that I guess could be reasonably called topical. I've always shied away from, what you said earlier, Eli, about liking the candy coated idea that is current and relevant. For good or for bad, I've always tried to avoid those current relevant topics, because I always feel like the flip side of topical is outdated. But this connected world that we live in now is not going anywhere. I mean, it's not a fad, it's our life. And so it felt topical and not topical at the same time to tackle this. I work for a company that makes, in my day job, for a company that makes software and hardware, and my job is kind of a research and development type job. And so, like, I'm not smart enough to build things or code things, or I don't have a nuts and bolts understanding of the technology in that way, but I see the process of developing a product, and I can see what it's like, what it may have been like for Ryan Cloverhill to build his company. And so I guess it informs the work that way, and giving, I guess I have a little bit of a day job sense of what it might be like to work at Link, which is the company in the book. It's the largest social media platform in the world, Link. And so my day job gives me a little bit of a sense of what it might be like to be a Linkster, I guess.
Okay, great. Well, actually, Eli mentioned that there were some philosophical ideas, maybe within the novel, or even social commentary. Is there anything else in the book that you talk about, or that you shed light on, other than our growing dependence on these devices?
Boy, I think that's probably up for readers to say. That's the main thrust of what I was going for. And again, reaching back into my own college days and my own, that meeting friends, going to Seattle, learning things in school. I was a philosophy minor in college, and I say that hesitantly because it makes it seem like I might know something about philosophy now, and I really don't. But I do remember that thrill of arguing ideas in a philosophy class. And I remember the couple of things that stuck with me from philosophy made their way into the book. I always enjoyed those sort of ethical problem scenarios, the lifeboat scenarios, like, well, what would you, if you were in a lifeboat, who would you eat first? That kind of thing. And one of my favorites was always the trolley problem. And so if you don't know, the trolley problem it's an ethical thought experiment that proposes, if you're on a runaway trolley and you're heading toward a group of people on the tracks, you have the ability to push a button or pull a lever and divert the trolley to another track where you would only kill one person instead of killing five people, let's say. But you would have to make a deliberate choice. If you did nothing, you're going to kill five people. But if you did something, you're still going to be killing somebody, and it's going to be your deliberate action that causes that person's death, but it'll be one person and not five, and you can stay up late with your buddies making all kinds of crazy trolley problem scenarios. And I always found that enjoyable. And so I enjoyed putting that in the book as a plot element. That sort of philosophical thought experiment as a plot element was fun to do.
Yeah, and Sean, I feel like that's like, I gave my copy of the book is with my brother-in-law in Nashville, because he was all about it, and that's how I pitched it to him. I was like, it's one of those, like, it's almost like a would you rather, like it's like like that was the whole thing. But playing off that too, I saw something about like the self-driving cars, and I think Barbara said something about these earlier, but they have like some sort of programming that does essentially the trolley problem. Like, so it's like
your ethical utilitarian.
Yeah, so if there's like if there's 3 people in front of you, like you're going into the side rail yourself, but like if you have 4 people in your car and there's one person in front of you, like that one person's getting it. Like there's some sort of programming, or I don't know if it's in there yet, or if it's, I can't remember, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like if we're making these things that are going to have to make these decisions, it's a numbers game.
I almost kind of wish I had thought about that for the book. Now, like the idea of technology actually doing the philosophy for you. That I did it the old-fashioned way. I made the characters like wrestle with the
You
problem, but
did.
now I
But
guess you
think
could have
about AI,
figure it out.
yeah, but think about AI and all the concerns we have about, whether they're smarter than we are, whether, they're more ethical, whatever it is, you could have done that. Would have been really, you can still do it. You can write a different book.
Maybe that's the
Next
sequel.
book,
Yeah.
Sean.
Anything else, Jacob?
That's it.
Wonderful. Well, guys, it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it. Good to see you, Eli. Thanks for taking time out. And Barbara, as always.
It was great. It was really fun. So I will hope.
And Jacob, thanks for the tech support.
Absolutely.
Right. So we'll hope that next time maybe you can actually come in person. That would be outstanding.
That'd be great.
It would be very nice. Thank you all very much. Don't forget, you can buy a copy of Device Free Weekend, actually nearly anywhere. Well, I'll limit you to the Poison Pen, but seriously,
But Poison Pen's a good place to get it.
Yeah, no. Is there an audiobook out there? There probably is.
Yeah, there's an Audible on Audible. There's an audio version. Zach Wagner did the reading. Great job on his part. I love it.
Audiobooks are really an interesting, different way of, taking in a story in our busy lives while you're driving. Instead of being on your cell phone, you could be listening.
Great way to read while you're like building a fence or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anyway, good night, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.